Hello, my chronically awesome friends. I'm Styna and welcome back to Sick, Tired, and Alone, the YouTube channel about dealing with chronic illness alone, which is only half as depressing as it sounds. Today's video was going to be just a general Q&A video. I had opened up my ask box on Tumblr to receive questions for this video, but I received one today that I thought was important enough to make an entire video about, because it's one that kind of applies to every chronically ill person, at least at some point in their life, I think. I had some things to say about it. So the question is, have you had to end friendships with people because of how they invalidated your illnesses? I mean, the brief answer is yes, but I have a much longer, rantier version to keep with the general trend of these videos. So a lot of us with chronic illnesses have experienced or will experience at some point or another someone who we consider close to us, a friend or partner or family member, who makes it clear that they don't want to talk about your illness. And that usually comes up when we've been complaining about our illness or when we couldn't make it out when we said we would, something that inconveniences them in some small way. And I would like to point out, if you think that someone else's chronic illness is inconvenient to you, please consider how they feel having to live with it for the rest of their lives. But my general theory about why healthy people tend to not want to talk about chronic illnesses, especially with people who are chronically ill, is because they like to remain in denial that chronic illness exists. And my theory as to why they like to remain in denial about chronic illnesses existing is because they, on some level, want to believe that that could never happen to them. That if they were to come down with a chronic illness, they would be able to heal it some way. Or that their lifestyle isn't going to land them in a position where they'll end up with a chronic illness, which chronic illness doesn't give a shit who you are or how you live, how young you are, how old you are. It doesn't care what your diet is or how much you've traveled or if you're going to school. Chronic illness does not care, and no matter who you are, you're not safe from it. So, have I had to cut people off because of how they invalidated my illnesses? Of course I have. Because the options were either eliminating that toxicity from my life or continuing to deal with it until eventually they left, because that's what happens. If they are that inconsiderate of something that is really important that you're going through, then they're probably not gonna hang around for forever, which might sound kind of brutal, but that's just how it usually goes. And in the meantime, you're just gonna be taking on the emotional abuse of them invalidating your illness. I've said it in videos before, and I will say it as many times as I have to. You're allowed to talk about your illness. You're allowed to complain about your illness. You're allowed to rant about your illness. You're allowed to be upset or sad or angry as fuck about your illness. For a lot of us, our illnesses are probably the most important things in our lives. Not that we want them to be, but we don't really have a choice because they dictate every single decision that we're going to make from here on out in our lives. How we live is determined by our illnesses, and that's kind of a big deal. As far as friends go, friends are supposed to be there for you when you need to talk about something or rant about something, and chronic illness is not exempt from that somethingness, especially when it's this big of a deal in your life. When I first got sick, like a lot of people who are diagnosed with chronic illnesses, I had never even heard of fibromyalgia before. I didn't know anyone else who was sick, or at least I thought I didn't, because no one ever talked about being chronically ill. I didn't really understand what was wrong with me, so I figured no one else would understand what was wrong with me, so I just didn't really talk about it for a long time. I tried my best to act like a normal, healthy person. That didn't work out super well most of the time, especially as my illness progressed. I lost a lot of friends really quickly because of how chronic illness changed my life. And it didn't just change my life, it changed me as a person. Chronic illness tends to do that because it takes away parts of you by which you defined yourself. And suddenly you have to figure out how else to define yourself. And as I got sicker and it kept taking away parts of me that I thought made me who I was, I eventually got condensed down to just my illnesses. At this point, of course, I don't consider myself just my illnesses, but they are a very big part of my life. I try to be really active in the chronic illness community. I try to be as open and honest as possible about my conditions, because there are people being diagnosed who were in the same position I was, who didn't really know what was going on, who didn't know other people who were sick, and who felt alone with their illnesses. When enough people left my life because of my illnesses, when I recognized that happening, I still wasn't super open about my illnesses in general, but when new people came into my life, I would kind of make a point of saying, hey, I have this thing and I kind of have limitations because of it, and here's what those limitations are, and just be patient with me. That helped a little bit, but I don't think I was explaining it well enough or giving them enough of an idea of what to expect, and they would still end up leaving, or they would get upset when my illnesses did exactly what I said they would do. It only took a couple times to realize that I had always been drawn to a certain type of person. I'm not just talking about partners, I'm talking about friends as well. And that was generally the type of person who wanted to travel and who liked to do spontaneous, sort of crazy things, because that's the kind of person I'd always been. But chronic illness had taken all that away from me, and that's not the type of person that I could be anymore. So it made sense that continuing to befriend those types of people might not work out the best for me. But those were the only types of people I'd ever really been friends with, so I didn't know how to look for different attributes in people in order to befriend them. And I still don't know how, but I've ended up at this point with amazing friends who are understanding and supportive and don't get pissed when I can't make it to something, and don't get upset when I talk about my illnesses and rant about them. And they understand that this is who I am. This is what you get when you get me. The most notable thing about me is that I'm sick. That is the most important thing about me and my life. I am sick. And I'm still not perfect in figuring out who isn't going to be an asshole about my illness. But now, when someone new comes into my life, I do my very best to make it clear at the beginning of the friendship or relationship or whatever it is, this is how I am, these are my illnesses, these are the limitations that they cause me and how they affect me and how they will probably affect you if you intend to be in my life a lot, and that's really all I can do. A lot of times the person will be like, yeah, no, I understand, it's fine, it won't be a problem. And then, you know, a few months later they realize, oh, she wasn't kidding and she really is sick and she's not getting better, and this is what I'm gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life. Okay, bye. And it sucks every time, but at least I know that that's not on me because I did everything I could to prevent it. At that point, they're the ones who had the problem. If I could get rid of my illness, I would in a heartbeat, but I can't, and I probably never will be able to. So I have to accept that this is me, and if someone else can't do that, that's not my fault. And if that happens to you, it's not your fault either. The turning point for me was when I found the Spoonie community online. Just finding other people who were dealing with similar things, and some of these people were so outspoken about their illnesses and would not bend to healthy people trying to oppress them, and I wanted to be like that. I wanted to not be ashamed of my illnesses. I wanted to not try to hide them. I didn't want to hide the fact that I was sick, because being sick was who I was, and I was never the type of person to want to hide who I was. That was the type of person I wanted to be, so that was the type of person I became. I threw myself into the Spoonie community on Tumblr. Eventually I made this YouTube channel, and I stopped withholding information about my illnesses on Facebook and Instagram and places where people from my real life have access to what I post, because I was only ever censoring myself to make sure the healthy people in my life didn't feel uncomfortable. At some point, I just realized that we don't owe them that. We don't owe anyone suppressing this really big, important part of us just to keep them from being uncomfortable. And it's important that we talk about our illnesses and put that information out there and raise awareness, because if people aren't exposed to it, they're not going to understand it. And I think that's one of the reasons so many people are uncomfortable about chronic illness, because they don't understand it. I know I didn't before I became sick. And so if we don't hide this major part of ourselves, if we talk about it without shame, because we shouldn't feel guilty about this life that happened to us. It's not our fault, and we're the ones who have to live with it. You know, we owe each other the visibility that comes from raising awareness, because the more of us who don't hide it, the less healthy people will be able to pretend we don't exist. With visibility and awareness comes a lot of amazing things. Bigger and stronger community, better disability accommodations, less discrimination and ableism, and ultimately more and better treatment options. So when someone is validating your illness, they're not just oppressing you, they're oppressing everyone who is chronically ill. The very basic point of this video is don't hold on to toxic people. There will be people who leave, and there will be people who you will have to leave. But there will be people who stay, and people who stay for the right reasons. Those are the ones who are worth seeking out and keeping close. I know it can be really hard to let people go sometimes, but all we can really do is what's best for ourselves. We have to live in these bodies, and we have to live these lives. Shouldn't we live them as best we can? So this video got like really super real, which doesn't tend to happen in my videos, but what are you gonna do? The ask box on my Tumblr page is still open if you'd like to send in a question for the Q&A video, which will now be coming out next week because I already did this week. You're more than welcome to leave them in the comments below, but I will be showing screenshots of them. So if you'd like to remain anonymous, the anonymous option in my ask box on Tumblr is enabled. If you would like to support me in making more videos like this and also videos not like this, please consider checking out my Patreon page. Feel free to follow me on all the things. I will see you all next time, my chronically awesome friends, but until then and always, take care. The most notable thing about me is that I'm sick. That is the most important thing about me and my life. I am sick, but I'm also a writer and a musician and a content creator. I have too many crystals and too many bottles of nail polish, and my dog basically owns me. I'm a person who believes in aliens and magic and love, and these are all things that define me, not just the illness. Can we just talk about this blue lipstick for a minute? Because I have wanted blue lipstick since middle school, I think, and I've also wanted silver hair for a very long time, and now I have them both at the same time, and I just don't even know what to do with myself. And then, you know, my favorite band is Patent Pending, and I have been loyal to them since I was 15, and I will continue to do so until I die, probably. My first tattoo was of candy corn, and I've always hated candy corn, but it was Halloween, and I was 18, and it was on sale. And I will never get it covered up because I don't believe in burying our mistakes. I believe in magic and aliens, and that's pretty fucking important.